You are in a dark and silent secret room, somewhere underground. No one knows about its existence. The only way out is a narrow underwater passage that has never been explored. Here at the Faculty of Truth, we will spend the last moments with a brave and courageous man who got lost but found a way to keep going. He survived for weeks in complete silence and darkness, waiting for someone to come. Unfortunately, time was running out, and every minute felt like it would never end. Before we begin, we need your help. Only 7% of our viewers have subscribed. By subscribing, liking this video, and hitting the bell icon, you can help us create even more great content and keep up with our latest uploads. Your support also helps us reach a wider audience. Without further delay, let's dive into today's video. It was a warm weekend in September 1984 when 3 divers, led by Nuno Gomes, went for an ordinary 20-minute dive to the furthest previously explored chamber in the Sterkfontein Caves, South Africa. This cave system charms archaeologists from around the globe due to its fossils from ancient times. One of the oldest is a 2.3 million-year-old skeleton of early humans that helps understand evolution. This cave consists of 90% dry cave and only 10% submerged wet cave that was never fully mapped or explored during that time. This fact might have intrigued divers to find something that would put their names in the history books. Nuno Gomes, along with his friends Peter Verhulsel and Malcolm Keeping, knew exactly where they were diving. Nuno had explored this trip just 2 weeks prior, so everyone agreed to follow him. They had to pass a series of sumps and chambers, including the famous elephant chamber that resembles a rock looking like an elephant with its trunk. After about 120 meters of diving via tight, claustrophobic passages, they reached their destination. The chamber was oval in shape, not very large, maybe 3 meters wide and 1 meter high. It was exciting to explore such chambers. Who knows, maybe this was the place where the first humans, 2.5 million years ago, had been. All 3 were excited and even planned to come back next time to explore all the other uncharted chambers within the cave. After a short time of excitement, they swam back slowly, in single file, and in the same order. First Nuno, then Malcolm, and finally Peter. Just a few minutes into the dive, Malcolm noticed that Peter was doing what he always does: keep exploring further. One quality that Peter definitely had was courage. He was accustomed to dark, narrow places and was not prone to panicking in the underground and underwater environment. Along with that courage went his independent nature and recklessness at times. This time he was off the line, observing something with his torch. He always hoped to find some artifacts related to the previously found million-year-old skeletons. This time there was nothing of interest on the bottom, so he guided himself back to the line. Malcolm and Nuno stopped for a moment, looking around in the hope of seeing Peter, and fortunately, after a few minutes, they saw a dim light coming out of one of the side passages. If only they could yell at him underwater not to do this ever again and to follow the line. Only a few minutes further into the dive, after they had passed the restriction into the Milner Hall chamber, Malcolm signaled Nuno by gently pulling on his fin that Peter was missing again. Milner Hall chamber was quite big and perforated with cavities and side passages. There were 2 possible routes around it, and the 2 divers didn't know if Peter had stayed behind them or passed them unnoticed, using the possible parallel passages to the side of the chamber. After some time waiting in Milner Hall, there was no sign of Peter. There were no bubbles, no lights, or noise. After the fruitless search along the original route, both divers took an additional line and checked out all side passages, not going further than a few feet to avoid getting lost. They searched for another 4 hours until they had run out of air in all of their cylinders. It was time to call for professional help. The first on site were fire brigade divers, who refused to dive due to a lack of cave diving experience. The water was now murky due to the suspended silt. The visibility was down to about 1 meter. At least they had fresh cylinders. So Nuno also called a fellow diver, Craig Stevenson, who had been in this very tunnel with him just weeks before. The two of them carried on with the search. Before the diving police arrived, Nuno was in charge. Now it was early morning, and Peter's body had not been found. Everyone was convinced that from this point forward, it would merely be a body recovery. If only they knew that Peter was somewhere out there fighting for his life. He was truly curious to see a bit further beyond the safety zone by exploring side passages. Sterkfontein is not a lake that can simply be exited by surfacing. It is an overhead environment. It is a dark, deceiving cave. At the entrance, it charms with crystal clear water, silence, and tranquility, only 4 meters deep. Down at the bottom, the silt is thick, accumulated over millions of years. It waits for a careless fin. After a few meters off the main passage into an unknown corridor, Peter, as always, decided to return, but he had lost all sense of direction. The scary thing about being lost in a cave is that it takes some time to comprehend that you are in fact lost. First, you think that it should be that way. After swimming for a while, you realize that you are not where you thought you should be. You take another turn with a similar result. Every turn looks familiar and at the same time, different. Peter began to panic, adrenaline surging through his veins as he realized he had no idea which turn to take. Desperately, he swam back and forth, eventually noticing a hole above him with a silvery reflection beyond. The hole was tiny, but Peter decided to try squeezing through. He scratched his gear and clothing, but managed to pass through, giving him a glimmer of hope. Peter was surprised to emerge in a small air chamber with an island. It was dark and silent, but with his small flashlight, he was able to look around and see a few tiny passages leading to unknown destinations. The initial excitement slowly faded as he realized that no one was coming, and he had no idea how to escape. After several attempts to flash his light into the water and calling out, Peter decided to sit on the island and wait. He turned off the flashlight to preserve the remaining 30 minutes of battery. He knew there was still a lot of oxygen in his tank if only he knew which direction to swim. He was afraid of getting stuck in the middle of the underwater maze. After some time, he was exhausted and fell asleep, not realizing this would lead to even greater confusion. When he opened his eyes, nothing had changed. It was still dark and silent. Peter had lost all sense of time. He might have slept for 5 minutes or even 5 hours. With no light, no food, and no reference for time, Peter was unsure how long he might have to wait to be discovered. Although he had plenty of air and drinking water, he realized his situation was dire. It quickly occurred to him that they might believe he had drowned. It was a harrowing challenge. Waiting was his only option, relying on the hope that the search would continue until he was found. After the first night of searching, the police locked down the wet and dry caves, barring anyone from diving or caving. Even if Peter had found an air pocket, he would have succumbed to hypothermia long ago in the wet tunnels. The police did not allow any civilians to join their dive mission, not even Nuno. As time passed, Peter realized it was hard for rescuers to find him. He didn't know if a week or 3 had gone by and felt hungry in the dark. While his flashlight worked, he found some paths that might lead him out of the water. Now in darkness, he carefully walked around his chamber and followed a path about 30 meters from the water, but it just led to a dead end. He saw other narrow paths, but was scared to go in, worried he might get stuck. To drink water, Peter used the end cap from the flashlight, which was useless anyway after the batteries died. Now, weakened by starvation and enduring solitary confinement in darkness for weeks, he faced an unbearable reality. Research has shown that individuals can experience hallucinations and mental decline within hours of complete silence and lack of visual stimuli. Day after day, Peter endured in an uncertain mental state while his body deteriorated, using its own muscle tissue for sustenance. Starvation is inherently traumatic, but when compounded by the absence of light, sound, and social interaction, the agony Peter endured becomes unimaginable. The growth of his beard served as the only somewhat reliable indicator of time. With his facial hair significantly longer, it provided a vague sense of the passing days or weeks, likely spending most of his time asleep due to lack of sustenance and absence of light to mark wakefulness. Peter's biological functions gradually deteriorated. After enduring weeks of starvation and shedding 44 pounds of body weight, he was barely clinging to life. The palpable despair was overwhelming as he struggled to stay alive. After 6 weeks of weekend diving, the police ended their search without finding anything. Once the ban on Sterkfontein was lifted, Roger and Nuno wasted no time in returning to the site. Roger, along with Sasa volunteers, opted to explore a dry cave, while Nuno plunged back into the wet cave. Surprisingly, on the very first day, Nuno discovered a connection to the dry cave, providing Roger with a potential lead on where to search for Peter. Shortly after, Roger located Peter using a dry entrance. His body was discovered in a small chamber near a sump located approximately 100 meters from the nearest dry exit. The markings on the chamber walls indicated his attempts to signal rescuers to his position. He must have heard them, particularly the police diver, who swam just 10 meters from the sump entrance. Peter had succumbed to starvation, resulting in a loss of 44 pounds. The length of his beard indicated he had spent 3 weeks awaiting rescue from the team, all in vain. Peter left a written message on the cave wall adjacent to the place where he was found. It said, "I love you, Shirley, and Mom."